This is Barely Playing. Today I'm just going to show off the Dark Effigy Warbringer build that I cooked up. This character is level 96. It's been pretty solid, not very many deaths. I think almost 15 of those were in campaign. So we've had a pretty smooth leveling process after the fact. Yeah, so we're just going to quickly go through a map here, and then I'll talk a little bit about how the character works, show off some of the gear, and we'll kind of wrap things up with some of the mechanics. So, yeah, we're going to be running just T16, 3 abysses on it, and I'm just going to show you guys how the character plays here. So, the goal with this character was for Dark Effigy to be our main clearing spell. So we are using Essence Rain and Contagion, but they do basically 0 damage. They're like 1% of our DPS. So I really wanted to focus this build on, this is a Dark Effigy build first. Everything else is just a way of enabling the Dark Effigy damage. And so you can see here, we're quite tanky. We've got because we're going Warbringer, we've got a really nice layers of defense, which means, yeah, even in quite a juiced map, you know, or relatively juicy, you can see here, we're pretty strong. The single target was originally the thing I was the most worried about when I made this build, but ironically now the single target is arguably better than the clear. This character has turned into basically a bossing character first and foremost. The clear's not bad, but it's not. It's definitely not a one-button build, turn your brain off, clear the whole screen kind of build. You do have to put in a little bit of work. And so yeah, with that said, you know, we'll just kind of go through a little bit more of the map here, show you guys how the character plays, and yeah, then we'll hop out, talk a little bit about the build. So you can see here, it's able to pretty comfortably handle some pretty juicy maps. You can see our health and ES is pretty stable. We're able to shrug off some pretty nasty hits. And yeah, and that's again thanks to a few layers of defense that we've got here. And so yeah, we'll kind of talk about that once we wrap up our map and show you guys how we can make our defenses as strong as they are. And there are a few things that could be improved on this character for sure, and I'm sure someone out there, if you're interested in this kind of build, I'm sure you could min-max this a little bit more here. This by no means is a perfect character, but I'm pretty happy with a few of the kind of core mechanical choices that I made setting this thing up. I think it's a pretty unique build. I think there's 0.1% of the ladder is playing Warbringer, so it was a bit of a challenge, a bit of fun for me to put together a Warbringer build using spells rather than using you know, attack totems or shockwave totems, something like that. And so yeah, I think we're pretty much done here. Let's just quickly show off the single target on the boss here, and then we'll hop back to base and we'll go through some of the mechanics. Now this character was my second character of the league, so if you wanted to level this from scratch, I mean, I ended up twinking it using like a Pillar of the Caged God setup, but you could level this as Essence Drain Contagion and basically ignore your Ascendancy if you wanted until you're like level 60 probably. But yeah, either that or you can just like completely twink as something else, and then swap over when you're ready. So yeah, just gotta try and find the boss here. You can see that one of the nice things about Dark Effigy is that the number of projectiles is it's tied to the number of enemies affected by dots, and so we don't really care how many enemies are on screen. In fact, sometimes it's actually better if there's more, because it just makes the spreading of contagion and stuff like that a bit smoother. But yeah, you can see it does clear pretty comfortably. A pleasant surprise I found quite recently was actually that I didn't realize that Headhunter would actually work on this build. I didn't think that totem kills counted as your own, to be honest. But now that I know that, there's a few things we can tweak in terms of getting a life on kill, mana on kill gem. That would be a nice upgrade. Where's this boss? Come on. But yeah, it does make the Headhunter a nice addition if you can afford it. They're not too bad this league, so I'm sure many of you can. I only just recently acquired mine, so I spent lots of money on rare items and amulet crafting long before I picked up my Headhunter. Where the heck is this boss? What am I missing here? Is it like way over here? Oh, there we go. Okay. So yeah, let's just show off the single targets. We put both our totems down, cast our curse, we apply both our Essence Drain and Contagion, and then we just want to stand close enough that our Contagion has, or our Wither has time to build up. Very nice. And you can see it's on an insta-kill, but pretty comfortable. My health basically didn't move. So, let's talk about the character. Again, we are playing Warbringer, so we are based in the bottom left side of the tree, and our tree is focused on a few things. Because we're totems, we don't actually have access to that many sources of damage on the tree, but there are a few good ones. So we've got our defensive totem mods down here, a little bit of percent totem damage. We've got a bit more totem placement speed and some attack speed, cast speed stuff here. We've got some nice hinder effect and spell damage in here, a little bit more skilled effect duration, which again helps with the totems. Some defensive stuff here, more totem options, attack, cast speed, etc. And then we travel all the way up here because there's a few really good damage nodes to pick up. So +1 level cast skills, excellent. Very, very, very strong node. Surprisingly, Wither Away is actually one of our best nodes in isolation because our withered magnitude is quite high, and as we'll look at later, we do have a mechanic for actually keeping those wither stacks on permanently. And then some extra as chaos damage is always great. The only other damage node on here basically is cast speed for different spell casts in the last 8 seconds. So this is something I mentioned before, that we do use basically all 5 of our keys on rotation. We use our totem, we use our curse, our essence drain, our contagion, and we spam mana drain because we have some pretty intensive mana costs. And we'll see that a little bit on the tree here as well, that we do have to spec into some stuff to try and keep our mana costs in check. So, in terms of the defensive option on the tree, we're going pretty heavy into armor. We've got a little bit of an energy shield. It's not anything crazy. We don't really have that much on the tree. We've just got hybrid ES armor gear, so we've got a fair amount of flat ES, but yeah, we're not going super hard into ES. We don't really have any form of recovery. It's mostly one-shot protection, because as we'll see in our defensive layers here, there are kind of 3 defenses, or 3 damage types that I wanted to solve for this character, right? So damage over time effects, small hits, and big hits. Damage over time effect, our goal was to get basically as much life recovery as we could. So we've got life regen here, life regen. We're converting some costs over to life to help mitigate some of the mana cost. Although those, frankly, are subject to change. I did experiment a little bit with recoup, but I wasn't a big fan of it. I think this node, unfortunately, is just not very good because you don't really ever want to be stationary in this game. And so yeah, we got a little bit more life regen here, a little bit there, and then we are running vitality too as well, right? So we've got somewhere in the realm of about 3 to 4% life regen at any given time. We've got a little bit more on our jewels as well, 6%, 10%, that kind of thing. And so that's to help mitigate our damage over time effects, because that's something that, as you'll see with our hit defense, it's something that we're very weak to if we didn't have life regen. Hit defense, we obviously have armor. We've got a decent chunk of armor, 8,000. Could be a little higher, but given that we're hybrid, so be it. So this will help us with small hits. And then on top of that, we have capped 75% block chance. So it means that small hits we're nearly immune to. Very, very strong defensive layer combined, right? So that's where the energy shield comes in. We want to be immune to big hits, and so by having our energy shield in addition to our life, if we're bossing or something, we effectively have 4,000 health pool rather than the 2,500 we have when we're mapping. In addition, to help mitigate some of those big hits, we're using a few sources of damage taken from something other than life. So on the War Master, we've got Wooden Wall here, so our totems will take 20% of damage from hits before we do. So as long as we have a totem up and it's relatively nearby, and in fact, I don't even think there's a limit to this because it's nearest totem. We're just taking 20% less damage. Amazing. Very, very, very strong note, right? Additionally, we've obviously got our block chance down here. A little bit of damage gets through from these hits, but that's fine because again, these are going to be mostly small hits, right? That's kind of what the block is really doing the heavy lifting on. Additionally, for 3 points, we're picking up another 16% damage taken as mana before life. We're not going mind over matter because the 50% less mana recovery rate makes it very, very difficult, you can see, to sustain the cost of our totems. And so it's actually more efficient in my experience to just take the 16% here for 3 nodes. And I mean, because we've got Arcane Surge, we've got Mana Drain, we've got potions, we can keep our mana regen pretty damn high. And so taking a blow to it to prevent us from getting one shot effectively just gives us 16% more max life. So that's kind of the main stuff for the defense. There's nothing else super interesting there. So let's start talking then about how to actually scale the damage, right? So you got 3 sources of damage. The first is gem levels. So right now you can see we're rocking level 38 Dark Effigy. So we're getting a whole bunch of plus levels all across our stuff. And you'll see it a little bit as we go through the gear. But it's a base hit, and so inevitably getting higher levels exponentially increases the base hit. So very, very strong in terms of scaliness. The other 2 sources, though, of scaling Dark Effigy is 1, number of totems. So right now we're only using 2 totems. Just because of the cost, I found that switching to a 3rd totem did not feel very good, and the mana cost was just way too high. So I found it more comfortable to keep 2 with the longer skill effect duration from not taking overabundance. The 3rd way of scaling damage, though, is the number of damage over times on a target. So, wrong spell. So if we look at this again, it says fire projectile at every nearby enemy affected by chaos damage over time debuff fires multi-proj when affected, for the number of debuffs on the target. So this is our bread and butter. This is how we really scale our damage. So the goal is to get as many sources of chaos damage over time debuffs on the target as possible. And we can get, I believe it's 5 or 6, I always forget. And the way we do this is not too bad. So there's 3 sources that come from our spells: Essence, or Contagion, Essence Drain, and then we are using Decaying Hex on our Despair, which will add Profane Decay, which is a separate chaos damage over time debuff. So right away we've got 3 from our spells. Now, you don't want to have to be casting all 3 spells on every single monster, and especially for bosses. If you cast all 3 on a boss, okay, well now you're effectively capped. So we wanted to get a few more chaos damage debuffs in there. We're in luck though, because there's 2 debuffs that we can very easily access. The first is poison. Now, you can run a poison gem, or chance poison gem in Dark Effigy. The problem with that is you're losing a gem slot. You can leave it up to your ancestral spirits to be your poison, but they're not super consistent, and because we're not scaling minions, they die pretty quick, even with Meat Shield. I mean, you could put Brutus's Brain in here, but then they can't deal damage, so I think then they can't poison. Not a super reliable way. So even though it's in here, it's not great. The best way, ironically, is actually through a jewel. Some of you may know this. You can get poison on hit as a jewel passive. The great thing is that this actually works for totems. And so now our Dark Effigy totems, as long as we apply any other source of damage over time, the Dark Effigy totems will apply their own poison just from that jewel, so we don't have to lose a skill gem or a support gem. And so they get to apply our 4th damage over time. And then for a 5th, we have you can see it here, a little bit of added damage as extra fire. We have very, very little. The thing is, though, our totems, especially on single target, hit so frequently that they build up the ignite flammability very, very quickly, or at least your chances of getting ignite, even with a low flammability, are very, very, very high, because we're just hitting hundreds and hundreds of times. And so that means that we basically permanently ignite the target just from having extra damage as fire. And again, it does basically no damage. If we look at the damage over time here, I mean, yeah, you can see it's like 1% of it. Ignite duration is 1.6 seconds. I mean, yeah, it's like 200 damage per second. But that's fine, because by using a Black Flame, our ignites deal chaos damage instead of fire damage. And so this counts as a chaos damage over time debuff. And so this gets us up to 5 projectiles from our Dark Effigy, hitting a single target, then multiplied by 2 totems. So we're actually getting 10 projectiles, and 1.6 casts per second. So we're effectively hitting 16, 17 times per second, at 17,000 per hit. And so this is really the bread and butter, is the Dark Effigy totems can apply their own poisons and their own ignites. So all we need to do is just kind of get an enemy buttered up with any other dot, and then once the Dark Effigies start hitting them, they'll then ramp themselves with 2 additional sources. So even if we're just clearing like this and we apply 1 source, the Effigy totems will apply another 2 sources, and often they'll even hit enemies who haven't yet been contagioned with the splash damage, and apply ignite and poison to those enemies, and then they'll hit them as well. And so it's a really nice, comfortable clearing method that way. So Black Flame, yes, it sucks losing a ring slot, but the benefit of this is also that withers we inflict do not expire on enemies ignited by us. Because we basically have permanent ignite uptime, even on bosses, it means that our wither stacks never fall off. And so, by scaling a Venomous rune, wither away on the tree, we have 40%, 60% increased magnitude. And so wither on bosses easily builds up to 80%. And so that's just 80% more damage taken from by the boss. And it won't fall off. You don't even have to worry about keeping yourself in their presence, because the ignites will keep the wither stacks from decaying. So this ring actually serves 2 purposes then. It both helps us keep our withers on the target. It also then gives us another source of dot. Excuse me. So, a few other pieces of gear we should talk about. Wands. The only things to note here really is, big plus chaos spell skills, +1 skills up here. Ideally with percent increased, because it's a bit hard to come by in this build. So getting a bunch on here feels really good. Cast speed also obviously feels really good. Your totems scale with your cast speed. So I think this wand was about 20 div, so not too bad, and it's quite strong. it increased my damage quite significantly when I picked it up. So you could get an even more expensive wand here, but something like this can easily get you into the 500,000 to 600,000, 700,000 DPS target range. On the helmet, pretty straightforward. Armor, ES, life resists. Same with the chest plate. Getting a bit of regen here if you can is nice. Same with the belt. On the gloves, we do want +2 level of all proj skills, because even though Darth Effigy is a totem, it's a proj totem, and so it does get the extra benefit from the proj skills on gloves. Additionally, we're using a caster amulet, so this is a +4 amulet using quality modifiers. If you want to learn how to make one of these, there's other guides online. I'm not going to go through that today, but the only things you really need on here is, a bit of spirit if you can. Helps with getting more mana ores. But other than that, just want some life and some spell skill levels. And we are allocating Lay Siege, which gives us 1% damage per chance to block, which is 75% damage. Pretty comfortable. Boots, pretty straightforward. Life, resistances, armor, etc. Same thing with shield. You could maybe switch this up, but there's some more expensive shields you can use, I'm sure. But the nice thing is, because our Ascendancy sets our block chance base to 30% or 35%, it actually doesn't matter what it is on the shield, so you can ignore percent increased block chance as a stat on the shield and just focus on the actual stats of the shield. Yeah, that's kind of the core of it. It's a pretty strong. Oh yeah, and sorry, ring. Similar story. 40% quality. We got spell damage. We got cast speed. We got arcane surge effect, and some, as much mana as we can get, because we do burn through it quite a bit. And so yeah, with all that said, we are incredibly tanky because we have so many layers of defense. We've got so many sources of, damage taken from mana, damage taken from our totems. Then it goes, through the armor and the block chance, and then kind of finally hits us. Oh, and you can ignore my resistances just because I just swapped to Headhunter, so I haven't rebalanced them yet. We actually just ran that map with 46% lightning res and did just fine. So, but yeah, so that's kind of the core of the build. Feels pretty comfy. At this point, it's pretty comfortable doing high level bossing as well. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or reach out. Thanks so much.